Alright guys, so we are back of course to talk about some remake. There actually was not an inside Final Fantasy VII Remake video today, which is kind of interesting, so it doesn't seem like it's gonna be a weekly thing. They did however post an interview with Naoki Yamaguchi and Yoshinori Kitase, and the main thing that stuck out to me of course is at the end where they talk about endgame stuff. So we're talking maybe like post-story content and super bosses. But before we hop into that, of course, some smaller bits. For starters, one that I should have mentioned in yesterday's video that completely skipped my mind. The first class editions are currently back in stock. So if that's something you've been wanting to get or missed out on, they are currently available. And the other bit of info is actually an update and an answer to yesterday's video on what the hell the World Preview book is. And it's thanks to a sub of mine actually commenting on yesterday's video and pointing out that we've already talked about this, which I highly appreciate. The World Preview book is this right here. We did a whole dedicated video about this item. The kind of TLDR on that video, if you did not watch it, is we were questioning the legitimacy of the delay of the game. It's kind of odd that the game got delayed and then this item gets announced. It was an item that you're supposed to have prior to playing the game, right? It's a companion guide. This companion guide was coming out on March 19th. Obviously, the original release date of the game was March 3rd, so it would make sense for it to come out after the release of the game. So it's just kind of suspicious that the game got delayed and then this got revealed. And the update / answer to yesterday's video is that we already know what this book is because the book already came out in Japan. It came out on March 19th. And for that reason, we know that it's only about the first game. Otherwise, if the book had characters and locations from outside the walls of Midgar, we'd have already seen that by now because it's been like 4 days. I think why I didn't realize these were the same book is because they had different cover arts. If it was the cover art on the right, which is the art we had whenever I did that video, I think I would have instantly recognized it, but these are obviously very different. Anyways, on to this interview. Now, obviously, we're not going to read this thing paragraph by paragraph and make the video much longer than it needs to be. We try to make our videos as short as we possibly can, but we will talk about the things that I find interesting. So first off, Kitase was asked, why do you feel that now is a good time to return to the world of Final Fantasy VII? So he mentions technology getting better over the 23 years since the game came out, and people's schedules finally lining up, but also there's players out there who probably have seen Cloud and Sephiroth in other games, something like Kingdom Hearts, Dissidia, but maybe never played the game that they originated from. He goes on to say, I felt that if we want to show people where these characters came from, then, truthfully, if the original game was the only way to experience it, new players, especially anyone that wasn't playing games in the original's era, probably wouldn't be so impressed with the original game compared to the latest titles they could be playing. So that felt like an exciting challenge and opportunity. Let's take everything great from the original and create something new and surprising for both the original fans and those that never played Final Fantasy VII before. So that's a narrative we've heard before, how they're making the remake for, new and old players, but I like his point of view on the first paragraph where he talks about how a modern day player is not really going to go back and be impressed by Final Fantasy VII, a PS1 game, compared to the games that we have now. They're not going to be able to see why Final Fantasy VII was so special back then unless they really grew up in that era. They're then asked, why did you make the decision to set this game entirely in the city of Midgar? We might read the whole answer here because this is such a hot topic that people are still talking about and complaining about. Kitase replies with, when we first started the remake project, we had to make a decision on what elements from the original we absolutely had to keep in order for it to still be considered Final Fantasy VII. In other words, what were the essential parts of the original, what were the parts that we knew fans absolutely had to see, and therefore we needed to retain. We quickly decided that there were so many essential parts that fans would be upset if we had to cut out anything from the original. At the beginning of the project, we had two directions we could go. The first was to make the project with the highest possible level of graphics, visual quality, and detail, and not remove anything that fans wanted to see. Instead, it would expand upon the original to make it something even more immersive. The other option was to include the entire scope of the original game in a single release. But in order to make that work as a modern game, we wouldn't be able to go for the highest visual quality, we'd also have to cut back on areas and scenes from the original. Essentially, to make a single release viable, the resulting game would have ended up being a digest of the original story, and we didn't think that fans would be pleased with that. Ultimately, we decided the best option for the project was to go for the highest level possible with an expanded story. Having more than one game in the project allowed us to focus on keeping everything people loved from the original, but go into greater detail and more story depth than before. Midgar is iconic to Final Fantasy VII, so we had to start the game here and follow the story up to the main party's escape from the city. So a bit of a lengthy read, but I wanted to let Kitase sort of explain why they chose Midgar only for the first game, and it's a narrative we've been saying for a long time. If they were to do the entire game with one release, everything as a whole would suffer. Midgar wouldn't be as detailed as it is currently, and then the world map that we're presumably going to have in the second game wouldn't be as good as it's going to be now that they can focus on just that. And as he also pointed out, by them focusing on just the Midgar segment, they can go more in depth with the story, whereas if they did the whole original game in one release, we would have just got the same story again, and I don't think anybody really wanted that. Now, would I have bought and played that? Certainly, but I'm excited for something new. They're then asked, how have you expanded the city? Can fans expect to see new areas of Midgar? Kitase replies with, in the original game, there were a lot of breaks in the game, where the screen went black and then the game continues in a different location. In other words, there were a lot of parts in between sections of Midgar that were implied but never seen. That was something that we wanted to address with the remake, to fill in all those gaps, show how the different parts of the city are connected, and make it a continuous experience. So in this particular case, what he's talking about when he's saying new areas, he's talking about those little bitty load screens we got in the original game. When you go from one area to the next, the screen goes black briefly, and then you load into the next area. Obviously, the game now is a fully realized 3D environment. We're not going to have that anymore. So that's where some of the new areas are coming in. Pretty much filling in the gap of the black load screen. Like, what's in that area? What's in that area between the two areas from the original game? So this is both a positive and a negative. Obviously, it's great to have areas from the original game expanded and fully realized, but it also doesn't seem like we're getting much, if any, new areas, like actual new areas, like, for example, new sectors to go explore. It's something that I was super hopeful for when we learned that the game was Midgar only, is being able to explore all of Midgar, and it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. And if it is, they're not talking about it, they're keeping that shit super hidden. But it doesn't seem like we're going to get much, if any, new areas, which is kind of disappointing. It pretty much seems like they've just expanded on the areas from the original game's Midgar segment, which is, again, good and bad. They then talk about Red XIII not being playable and ask to specify what exactly his role is in the game. Turns out he's not just a guest character for combat. Hamaguchi explains, however, the development team feel the same way that the fans do when it comes to seeing Red XIII as an important character, and we designed his gameplay in a special way to offset him not being playable in battle. I won't reveal exactly what that entails, because I want people to enjoy it when they actually play the game, but I will say that Final Fantasy VII Remake has added a new upper floor to the Shinra building to present a climax that was not in the original. The key to navigating this floor lies in using Red XIII's unique physical abilities to overcome environmental obstacles. Letting the player experience his heroics in this way is something that I'm confident will please the fans. So a couple takeaways from that. For one, there's a new floor to the Shinra building for the climax of the game, which is kind of interesting, so I wonder if that's like the final boss area. Maybe that's where we see the Genova fight with Red XIII in this trailer. But they also point out that you use Red XIII's unique physical abilities to overcome environmental obstacles in this area. So I think what they're talking about there is that he's, a cat, a feline, an actual lion, whatever you want to call it, and he can probably jump super, super high. So I'm assuming that's what they mean by his unique physical abilities. Not entirely sure, and I don't even know what we would do with that. Maybe just jumps up to really high locations. Or it could be something entirely different. That's just kind of my interpretation, my thoughts on it right now. But it's nice to know that Red XIII is not just going to be a guest character in battle and a character that's just kind of there during the cutscenes. He's actually going to be used for stuff. And the last thing I took note of is the very last question that says, fans expect a lot from Final Fantasy, such as secrets or hidden bosses. Is this the case in Final Fantasy VII Remake? And we're going to read Hamaguchi's entire answer that says, we can't say exactly how much there is. We want to keep some surprises for players. I will say, Final Fantasy VII Remake has been designed as if it were a standalone game and comparable in size to other mainline Final Fantasy games. The content you mentioned from other Final Fantasy games, I don't want to say precisely what's in Final Fantasy VII Remake, but if you're expecting endgame content, you won't be disappointed. So for me, this is obviously the biggest takeaway from this entire interview. I did an entire video dedicated to super bosses, and that seems to be what they're implying here. There is secrets to find, there are hidden bosses to find, which should mean super bosses. Now, none of this is really a surprise. We kind of expected this anyways, but it's nice to get the confirmation from the developers themselves. Now, as for what those hidden bosses or super bosses could be, it's kind of hard to speculate, man. It's a brand new game. We talked about in that video I showed earlier, there are a couple of weapon enemies that are in and around Midgar. Jade Weapon from Before Crisis. Also, Zirconiad from Before Crisis could potentially be a super boss, and we also had Omega Weapon from Dirge of Cerberus. And if we can potentially get outside the walls of Midgar just a little bit with some of the endgame, after story stuff, there's of course the Midgar Zolom. Other than that, they could have bosses from the full FF7 game, but maybe reprising them as hidden or secret bosses for the Midgar segment specifically. And then there's of course just new enemies altogether. So damn, man, there actually ended up being quite a bit of good info from this interview. I kind of just skimmed over early this morning whenever they tweeted it out or whatever. I didn't, fully read the entire thing, and it didn't seem like there was a whole lot, but then when I actually broke it down and talked about it, there's quite a bit. It's nice to see my boy Red XIII getting a little bit of respect. He's not just a guest character for combat. We're going to be using him for more in the game, which is nice. It's kind of a lengthy video. We talked about a lot of stuff here. You can kind of weigh in on whatever you want to, but the question I want to end the video with is, what do you think the in-game stuff is going to be? What do you think the hidden bosses and or super bosses are going to be? Leave your thoughts and more in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to stay updated with more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @dashingdavid. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys. Give me forever for a while, quit acting like a baby.